What if your whole life changed in the span of a winter afternoon? In a quiet Baltimore suburb, where teenage dreams collided with cultural expectations, a story began to unfold that would captivate the nation for decades to come. Picture Woodlawn High School in 1999, a place where hallway romances bloomed and faded, where futures seemed as bright as the morning sun streaming through classroom windows. Among its corridors walked an honors student with an infectious laugh and dreams of becoming a doctor. Her story, and the dark turn it would take, would eventually shake the foundations of America's justice system. January 13th started like any other Wednesday. Students hurried between classes, complained about homework, and made plans for the weekend. But by nightfall, something had gone terribly wrong. A routine afternoon errand would become the first thread in a mystery that continues to unravel today. The investigation that followed reads like a noir detective story. Anonymous tips, shifting alibis, and a key witness whose story would change dramatically over time. But this was no fiction. Real lives hung in the balance, and real families would never be the same. When a groundbreaking podcast revisited the case 15 years later, what emerged was far more complex than anyone imagined. Each new revelation seemed to raise more questions than answers. Cell phone records that once seemed damning now appeared uncertain. Witnesses who once seemed sure began to doubt their memories. This isn't just another true crime story. It's a mirror reflecting our deepest fears about justice and truth. How well do we really know the people around us? Can we trust our own memories? And in a system designed to find absolute truth, what happens when the truth refuses to be absolute? The case would eventually force the American legal system to look hard at itself, challenging long-held assumptions about evidence, testimony, and the very nature of proof. But at its heart, this remains a human story, about young lives interrupted, about cultural barriers and bridges, and about how a single afternoon can echo through decades. What you're about to discover might make you question everything you think you know about truth and justice. Sometimes the most important questions aren't about what happened, but about what we choose to believe and why. Here's a longer, more suspenseful version of Act 2. The investigation. How Adnan became the prime suspect. Focusing on the discovery of Hae's body, the anonymous tip, Jay Wilde's shifting testimony, and the cell phone records. For weeks, the question haunted everyone who knew her. Where was Hae Min Lee? The search had turned up nothing. No sightings. No leads. No reason why a high school senior, so full of life, so busy planning for her future, would simply vanish. Then, on February 9th, a discovery changed everything. A maintenance worker, Alonzo Sellers, was driving along the western edge of Leakin Park, a vast wooded area with a reputation for being a dumping ground for bodies. He pulled over and walked into the trees, searching for a private spot to relieve himself. A few steps in, something caught his eye. At first, it looked like just another patch of disturbed earth, leaves scattered over an uneven mound. But then he saw something else, something unmistakable. A human foot, partially buried, motionless. Sellers backed away and ran to find help. Minutes later, police swarmed the scene. As they peeled away the dirt and leaves, it became painfully clear. This was Hae Min Lee. Her body was twisted awkwardly, partially covered, but not deeply hidden. The positioning suggested someone had hurriedly tried to conceal her. Investigators noted the signs of strangulation, later confirmed as the cause of death. But why here? Leakin Park had long been notorious, a place where criminals disposed of the things they never wanted found. a place where secrets could disappear into the earth. Except this time, the secret hadn't stayed buried. Who had placed her here? And why? The police now had a body. They had a crime scene. But they still had no suspect. That changed 3 days later. On February 12th, a phone call came in to Baltimore County Police. The caller refused to identify themselves, but had one clear message. You should be looking at Adnan Syed. The words landed like a bombshell. Until that moment, Adnan had been just another person in Hae's life. Her ex-boyfriend, a fellow student, an honor roll athlete known for his charm. The two had dated for nearly a year, but by the time she went missing, Hae had moved on, seeing someone else. But now, someone was telling the police that Adnan was the one responsible. Who was this caller? Why were they so certain? And, more importantly, why had they waited weeks to come forward? The police didn't know. But they knew one thing. They had a name. And they were about to dig into Adnan Syed's life with everything they had. As detectives traced Adnan's movements on January 13, 1999, the last day Hae was seen alive, they kept circling back to a name that seemed oddly connected to him. Jay Wilds. Jay wasn't one of Adnan's close friends. In fact, they weren't particularly close at all. But they knew each other. They had mutual friends. They hung out from time to time. And Jay had something that Adnan needed, a car and a cell phone. At the time, not everyone had their own phone. Adnan, however, had one a rare privilege. On the afternoon of January 13th, he had loaned it to Jay, along with his car. That alone wasn't unusual. Friends borrowed things. But as detectives pressed Jay for details about that day, the story he told them would shift the entire case. Jay claimed that on the afternoon of January 13th, Adnan had confided in him that he was going to kill Hae. At first, Jay didn't believe him. Who would? It sounded like a bad joke. But later, Jay claimed Adnan called him to pick him up, and when he did, Adnan showed him Hae's body in the trunk of her own car. Jay's account was graphic. He described Adnan's demeanor, the way he allegedly spoke about what had happened, and most importantly, how he helped Adnan bury the body in Leakin Park later that night. This was the break police had been waiting for. They had a witness, someone who claimed to have seen Hae's body, someone who could describe the burial site before it had even been found. There was just one problem. Jay's story kept changing. The sequence of events, the locations, the specific times. Each time police interviewed him, the details shifted slightly. The broad strokes were the same. Adnan had confessed. Adnan had shown him the body. They had buried her together. But the timeline and circumstances never seemed to align perfectly. Some investigators noticed the inconsistencies. Why did Jay's version of events keep evolving? Was he scared? Confused? Or was there something else at play? Despite these lingering questions, the police had one undeniable fact. Jay knew where Hae's car was located before the police found it. To them, that was enough. But there was one more piece of evidence that police believed sealed the case. Adnan's cell phone records. They looked at the call logs from January 13th, the very day Hae disappeared. Among the dozens of calls made and received that day, one stood out. At 7:09 p.m., an incoming call pinged a cell tower near Leakin Park. This, police believed, was the moment when Adnan and Jay were burying Hae's body. It was proof, they said, physical evidence, that placed Adnan near the crime scene at exactly the right time. But was it really? Over the years, experts have questioned the reliability of these records. Cell towers don't always pinpoint a person's exact location. They only show which tower the phone connected to. And in 1999, incoming calls weren't even considered reliable for location tracking. Had police misinterpreted the data? Or had they locked onto it because it fit the story they already believed? At the time, those doubts didn't matter. With Jay's testimony and the cell records appearing to back him up, police arrested Adnan Syed on February 28, 1999. 17 days later, a grand jury indicted him for first-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and robbery. Just like that, a 17-year-old honor student with no history of violence was now facing life in prison. But even then, questions remained. Was Jay telling the truth? Did the cell records really prove anything? Had police found the right man, or had they built a case on shaky ground? The answers, even decades later, are still up for debate. In the early months of 1999, the city of Baltimore was gripped by the tragic murder of Hae Min Lee, a bright and promising high school senior. As the investigation unfolded, attention turned to her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed, leading to his arrest on February 28, 1999. What followed was a courtroom drama that would captivate and divide public opinion for decades. Adnan Syed's trial commenced in January 2000, following an initial mistrial. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the testimony of Jay Wilds, an acquaintance who claimed that Syed had confided in him about the murder and enlisted his help in burying Hae's body. Complementing this testimony were cell phone records that prosecutors argued placed Syed at the scene where Hae's body was discovered. Notably, there was a conspicuous absence of physical evidence directly linking Syed to the crime. Representing Syed was defense attorney Cristina Gutierrez, a once renowned lawyer whose performance during the trial raised significant concerns. Observers noted her frequent lapses in focus, disjointed arguments, and a general decline in the vigor that had previously characterized her courtroom presence. Unbeknownst to many at the time, Gutierrez was grappling with serious health issues, including multiple sclerosis and diabetes, which may have impaired her ability to effectively represent her client. A critical oversight during the trial was the failure to investigate and present testimony from Asia McClain, a potential alibi witness. McClain had stated that she saw Syed at the public library during the time the prosecution alleged the murder occurred. Despite reaching out to Syed's defense team, her account was never pursued, a decision that would later be scrutinized as a glaring misstep in Syed's defense. After a 6-week trial, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on February 25, 2000. Syed was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, robbery, and false imprisonment, resulting in a life sentence plus 30 years. The courtroom was a tableau of raw emotion. Syed maintained his composure, expressing faith in his innocence, while Hae Min Lee's family grappled with the profound loss of their beloved daughter. Media coverage at the time was relatively subdued, with local outlets reporting on the case, but not delving deeply into its complexities. It wasn't until years later, with the advent of the Serial podcast, that the case would receive extensive national and international attention, sparking debates about the integrity of the investigation, the effectiveness of Syed's legal representation, and the broader implications of the justice system's handling of the case. In the years following the conviction, questions surrounding the trial's fairness and the competence of Syed's defense have persisted, leading to numerous appeals and a re-examination of the evidence. The case stands as a poignant example of how the convergence of legal missteps, health issues of defense counsel, and overlooked evidence can profoundly impact the pursuit of justice. In 2014, A journalist named Sarah Koenig embarked on a journey that would reignite global interest in a case long considered closed. The story was that of Adnan Syed, convicted in 2000 for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Hae Min Lee. Despite the conviction, lingering questions and inconsistencies had persisted, largely unnoticed by the public. Koenig's investigation, presented through the podcast serial, would bring these uncertainties to the forefront, captivating millions and sparking widespread debate. As Koenig delved into the case, she uncovered a series of troubling inconsistencies. The prosecution's narrative hinged on the testimony of Jay Wilds, an acquaintance of Syed, who claimed that Syed had confided in him about the murder and enlisted his help in burying Hae's body. However, Koenig discovered that Wilds' accounts had varied significantly over multiple interviews, raising doubts about their reliability. These shifting narratives begged the question: was Wilds telling the truth, or was there more to the story? Another critical element of the prosecution's case was the cell tower records, purportedly placing Syed at the scene where Hae's body was discovered. Koenig consulted experts who highlighted potential flaws in the interpretation of this data. Cell tower pings, they explained, could be unreliable indicators of a person's exact location, especially given the technology available in 1999. This revelation cast doubt on the so-called smoking gun evidence. Could it be that the cell tower data was misrepresented, leading to a wrongful conviction? Perhaps most startling was the emergence of Asia McLean, a classmate who asserted she had seen Syed at the public library during the time the murder was alleged to have occurred. Despite reaching out to Syed's defense team during the original trial, her account was never investigated or presented in court. Koenig's interviews with McLean revealed a credible alibi that had been inexplicably overlooked. Why was this potentially exculpatory evidence ignored? As serial unfolded week by week, listeners around the world became armchair detectives, dissecting every detail and forming their own theories. Online forums buzzed with debates, and the case became a cultural phenomenon. The podcast's meticulous re-examination of the evidence not only highlighted the complexities of the case, but also underscored broader issues within the criminal justice system. In the wake of Serial, the clamor for re-evaluation of Syed's conviction grew louder. Legal experts, journalists, and the general public called for a fresh look at the evidence. Propelled by the unsettling questions Koenig's investigation had unearthed. The podcast had done more than tell a story. It had sparked a movement, challenging the finality of a verdict and advocating for a deeper quest for truth. The serial effect demonstrated the profound impact of investigative journalism and storytelling, illustrating how revisiting a case with fresh eyes could alter public perception and potentially the course of justice. In the early months of 2022, a series of events unfolded that would dramatically alter the course of Adnan Syed's life and reignite discussions about justice and closure. After spending over 2 decades behind bars for the 1999 murder of Hae Min Lee, Syed's conviction was vacated in September 2022, leading to his release. This decision was influenced by new evidence suggesting that prosecutors had failed to disclose information about alternate suspects during the original trial. Further DNA testing conducted around the same time found no link between Syed and the crime scene, casting additional doubt on his involvement. The vacatur of Syed's conviction was a moment of profound relief for him and his supporters, who had long maintained his innocence. However, for Hae Min Lee's family, the decision reopened old wounds and left them grappling with renewed uncertainty about the true circumstances of their daughter's death. The public, having followed the case closely through various media, was divided. Some celebrated the potential correction of a miscarriage of justice, while others were concerned about the implications for the victim's family and the unresolved questions that remained. In the months following Syed's release, legal proceedings continued to evolve. In March 2023, an appellate court reinstated Syed's conviction, citing procedural issues related to the vacatur hearing, particularly concerning the rights of the victim's family. This reinstatement was upheld by the Maryland Supreme Court in August 2024, which ordered a new hearing to address these procedural concerns. Despite the reinstatement, Syed remained free pending the outcome of the new hearing. These developments underscored the complex interplay between legal procedures, victims' rights, and the pursuit of justice, leaving the public and those directly involved in a state of continued uncertainty and emotional turmoil. In the intricate tapestry of the Adnan Syed case, each thread weaves a story of mystery, legal battles, and profound human emotion. As we reach the culmination of this narrative, we're left with pressing questions that continue to echo. What truly transpired on that fateful day in 1999? If Adnan Syed is innocent, then who was responsible for the tragic death of Hae Min Lee? The journey from conviction to release and the subsequent legal twists have unveiled layers of complexities. The emergence of alternate suspects, such as Ronald Lee Moore, a career criminal from Baltimore identified during the serial podcast investigation, adds depth to the enigma. Moore, released from prison just days before Hae's disappearance, was later implicated in other serious crimes, casting a shadow of doubt over the original investigation. The legal odyssey took a significant turn in September 2022, when Syed's conviction was vacated, leading to his release after over 2 decades of incarceration. This decision was influenced by revelations that prosecutors had failed to disclose information about alternate suspects during the original trial. Further DNA testing found no link between Syed and the crime scene, intensifying debates about his innocence. However, the path to exoneration was not straightforward. In March 2023, an appellate court reinstated Syed's conviction, citing procedural issues related to the vacatur hearing, particularly concerning the rights of the victim's family. This reinstatement was upheld by the Maryland Supreme Court in August 2024, which ordered a new hearing to address these concerns. Despite these legal reversals, Syed remained free, embodying the ongoing tension between legal procedures and the quest for justice. The emotional landscape of this case is equally complex. For Adnan Syed, the vacatur of his conviction and subsequent release offered a semblance of freedom. Yet the looming possibility of reinstated charges perpetuates uncertainty. For Hae Min Lee's family, each legal development revisits the pain of their loss, compounded by the unresolved nature of the case. The public, having been drawn into this narrative through various media, remains divided, grappling with questions of justice, due process, and the elusive nature of truth. As we reflect on this intricate saga, we invite you to engage with these unresolved questions. Do you believe Adnan Syed was wrongfully convicted? Or does the existing evidence suggest a more complex reality? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. For those captivated by deep dives into true crime cases that challenge perceptions and uncover hidden facets, consider subscribing to our channel. Together, we explore stories that demand a second look, shedding light on the nuances of justice and human experience.